Who dumped a whole truckload of fizzies into the swim meet? Who delivered the medical school cadavers to the alumni dinner? Every Halloween, the trees are filled with underwear. Every spring, the toilets explode.
Welcome to the weekday show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Where John never wants to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
You know, John, every time I hear that Dean Wormer, one of those cuts from Animal House. Your favorite one is, of course, John always says with much vermin vigor. What's the famous quote that John says all the time?
0.0.
That's pretty much the way he says it. Remember, I told you I read that story about this guy who goes on a plane and he sees, and I can't remember the name of the actual actor, the guy who was Dean Wormer in the Animal House movie, and he's walking up the aisle and he sees him sitting in his chair and he goes, "Dean Wormer!" And the actor says, I had other roles.
I mean, talk about being typecast. It reminds me of the guy who played the bad guy Johnny in the original Karate Kid movie. Said that for years he would be out at social events or at somebody's house party, and people from across the room would be staring at him like he was a complete jerk and treat him really rude. And Johnny, the guy who played Johnny, was like, that was a character, right? I'm not going to go up and shove this party's version of Daniel LaRusso. Like, right. I was just playing a role.
Right. And that's sad because of the fact that you go through history. Like, for example, look at Gilligan's Island. I mean, almost all those people, Dawn Wells and all the people that are in there. Now, Jim Backus had a very good career, and, he was also a very famous, talented voice artist as well, too. He did the Mr. Magoo stuff, and he did other voices as well, too. But Dawn Wells, tell me how many movies she was in after the Gilligan's Island, and
no idea. Yeah, probably none.
Like because they become so ingrained in that, and not only that, I think it's probably a tribute to the fact that how good of a job they did of pulling off that role. You know what I mean? Essentially, they become that person, and you just can't.
It's the Steve Urkel effect, right?
Right, the Steve Urkel effect. There's another one. That is John Combest. Every morning we get together, and you know what? The most important thing that John and I do every morning, and I mean this sincerely, we have fun, okay? If this show wasn't fun, I don't know about you, John, I wouldn't be doing it.
Absolutely not.
If this were Meet the Press, I'd say.
Meet the Depressed. As Rush Limbaugh would say, meet the depressed. Or disgrace the nation.
We didn't talk about the fact that who was it? That and once again, I'm not in the tank for J.D. Vance, but he is so good in these interviews where the interviewers ask him these biased questions, and he just rips right at them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, he sure does.
The latest one, if you saw this or not, where I can't remember who. I can't remember. It was a woman who was interviewing him, and she's going something about, it's been disproved that there weren't that many gangs in Aurora, and did you see this cut?
No, I didn't see this.
Oh, I have to see if I can find this one. And she's like poo-pooing the fact that it's really not that big of a deal. And he essentially says, hold on a minute, sort of stops her in her tracks. And now it's interesting because I've read several articles that people talk about, we moved out of that apartment complex because the gangs took it over, And,
yeah, exactly.
And not only that is like, if one gang takes over one apartment complex, I don't care where it's at. To me, that's a problem. And essentially, she was saying like, well, there were only a few apartment complexes. Okay, once again, there's a line. They're saying like, well, we only have a few murderers in St. Louis. Okay, that's a problem. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know. I have it on good authority that there's a brand new crime tracking program introduced by Mayor Tashara Jones. It's not in our top 3 stories today, Brad. But to be honest, I haven't even bothered reading the story because I'm sure whatever tracker is tracking crime is going to seriously undercount. They're going to count like 8 car break-ins as one incident. But hey, who knows, Brett?
Well, once again, I know you're the guy that's never dialed 911, but there are a lot of people that are just saying, my car got broken into. It's not even worth calling 911 for anymore. You know what I mean? It's just the point where, and especially you go into cities like New York and places like that, they don't even respond to that anymore. They tell you, come down to the station and make a report. Okay, like who's going to do that? If your car gets stolen, yes, then you have to do that because of the fact they have to put it in the database. So if it shows up somewhere, they'll find it. But, if your car gets broken into, what are they going to do? They're not going to come out and fingerprint it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I text the St. Louis version of Bernard Getz. His name is Brad Hildebrand. And he's there on the double, Then he'll ride the Metrolink. He'll hop off the train. He'll get rid of the evidence. He'll go stay somewhere in the mountains for a while till the police find him.
See, it's funny you should mention that. We need to get into the top three here, but we're getting sidetracked. It's funny you should mention that because remember the big controversy that the Jason Aldean song came out was never in
Try that in a small town.
Yeah, try that in a small town. And everybody went, oh my God, that's terrible. Unless you've lived in a small town and you get that because of the fact that there's not that they're going to be like a bunch of gangs show up at your door, all the locals, hey, we saw you drop that McDonald's wrapper in the street. We're here to teach you a little justice. It doesn't happen that way, but still it's to the point where you get subtle little cues, and not necessarily as subtle as they should be about things like that you're not appreciated if you're a scumbucket in a small town. You know what I'm saying, John?
I do know, and it's like the feeling you get when you're driving on 94 and you pass the sign that says Weldon Spring. And now that I think about it, that leads into story number 3.
That's John Combest. Every single day he does this thing where he puts together all these interesting stories. We break it down to the top 3. And by the way, his web address is johncombest.com, Combest. We bring this guy in, and his name is...
I'm Casey Kasem.
And what's your job, Casey?
Now on with the countdown.
He counts them down. We start off with...
In third place...
The ink is still wet, Brad, on the paperwork that Bill Eigel, your friend and mine, filed in St. Charles County, Brad. I should say he filed it with the Missouri Ethics Commission. I should be more specific here. To run in 2026 for an unnamed office in St. Charles County. This story is brought to us by Kurt Erickson of the Post-Dispatch, who's always a big bowl of smiles. And Bill Eigel filed this paperwork, Brad, does not have to specify which office he is interested in running for. He could run, I guess, theoretically, for a county council seat, or he could run for county executive. Now, the story notes, of course, that Steve Ellman is 77. I'm guessing, actually, Steve Ellman already announced that he's not running for re-election. So, Brad, we've talked just recently in the last week about how Bill Eigel, many thought he might run in the 2nd Congressional District. We know Ann Wagner has come out and said, au contraire, I'm running for re-election. So, what's Bill Eigel going to run for, Brad? You think he would run for county council? Or do you think he's going to run against your buddy, Mike Elam, for St. Charles County Executive?
Well, okay, now I'm confused. Did he also file for, 2nd Congressional District as well, too?
No, this is an important distinction, Brad. He filed paperwork for the FEC, which would allow him to raise money. But that's different than actually filing for the office.
But I thought you said he specifically said he was going to run against Ann Wagner. Didn't we have that story?
He didn't say he's going to run. He files paperwork to allow him to raise money for that race. That's not the same as filing for the race.
But didn't he have to specifically say I'm
in the 2nd Congressional District? You're right. But maybe we're parsing words here, Brad. But that vehicle allows him to raise money on a federal level for a federal office. What he filed with the Missouri Ethics Commission on Friday allows him to raise money for a county seat to be named.
Okay, so in other words, he's hedging his bets is what this is?
It's like a football option quarterback, Brad. Bill Eigel could run the ball. He could pass the ball. He's a pilot. He could fly. He could get on Bob Onder's plane. He could fly. Who knows, Brad?
Bill Eigel's a pilot?
I could be making that up. I see him on planes a lot. Maybe he just flies with Bob Onder.
I don't think he is a pilot.
I could be adding something to his resume that's not there.
Okay, so
I mean, he was in the Air Force, so he's got that going.
Yeah, but there's lots of people in the Air Force aren't pilots. Okay, so you're saying let's cut through all the opaqueness of John's thing. He's running for county executive, right? That's essentially what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I can't fathom him wanting to run for county council. And in fact, Brad, if I was a Bill Eigel partisan, I would say it would be irresponsible for him to run only for one county council seat, considering the following he has, considering the momentum he gained. Coming in second to Governor Mike Kehoe, I think it would be doing a disservice to his supporters to run for a mere county council seat. And in fact, if I were him, I would, now you know how I feel about this, Brad. I still hold the unpopular opinion. I can't imagine Ann Wagner wanting to come back and run another campaign in 2026. So you're Bill Eigel, you keep the federal PAC open, you have the paperwork filed. And you know what? If Ann Wagner decides at the beginning of 2026 that she's not going to run, you know what? You still got that option open.
Okay, I thought, now, you know what? I'm getting old there. I'm pushing 90.
Yeah.
I thought you said, once again, last week that Ann Wagner said she was going to run for re-election in 2026.
She did say that, yeah. She announced that she's definitely running for re-election.
But you just sort of made it sound like she wasn't running for re-election.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Brad.
So in other words, nobody knows, right? It's like...
Well, people change. Listen, and I'm not trying to be coy here, but people say that they're going to run for something, and then life circumstances happen. People say they're not going to run for something, and suddenly Josh Hawley's running for U.S. Senate. So plans change, Brad. You have to be fluid. You can't just look at something you said years ago and say, "Oh, well, I'm going to." No. I definitely said I'm running for re-election.
Hold on a minute, John. John, I remember. I'm a little confused in something. I remember distinctly that Josh Hawley, when he was running for Attorney General, he distinctly said he's not going to use the office as Attorney General as a stepping stone to a higher office. I mean, he's still the Attorney General, isn't he?
No, you remember incorrectly because you were staring at his skinny jeans.
And his pirate
You were the
shoes.
original version of Lucas Kunce. You were staring at him longingly.
Yeah, Lucas.
You're like Lucas Kunce 1.0. Maybe Lucas Kunce 2.0 with the fake accent and the extra medium T-shirt is actually just a knockoff version of Brad Hildebrand. But you know who's not a knockoff version, and there's only one of them. A guy running in the 2nd Congressional District.
And is he our second? Our number 2 this morning? Is that what you're?
He is, Brad.
Okay, amazingly. Okay, here we go.
Up a notch to number 2.
Trigger warning for Brad Hildebrand. This is going to make him very mad and probably annoyed. Ray Hartmann, running in the 2nd Congressional District, Brad. Not only is he a former publisher and founder of the Riverfront Times, but he is also an employee of his own campaign. Ray Hartmann is paying himself $5,500 a month to run for Congress. That's a pretty good deal, Brad, don't you think?
He's paying himself $5,500 a month?
Yeah, he's paying a $5,500 a month salary from his own campaign funds. So he's getting paid to go out and run. Now, Brad, we've talked about this before when he announced. I have a link up today on my website we discussed back in March. Ray Hartmann was on Scott Vaughn's Midweek Update. Ray made the ridiculous suggestion. That was back in June. Ray made the ridiculous suggestion that the National Democrats were going to come in and, offer him some help. Everybody says that. But, Brett, I think it's a pretty great deal. Now, we talked back in March, when I mentioned March before. I said this was a great opportunity for Ray Hartmann to go around. This campaign is wonderful for him. He can go to cocktail parties. He can be, a big deal. And then, let's say Ann Wagner truly doesn't run for re-election. Ray can be like, I'm the one that put Ann into retirement. It was so bad to run against me that she quit. Anyway, Brad, a pretty good deal. He's paying himself. Congressional candidates can pay themselves to run. So Ray is an employee of himself. He's a self-employed candidate. And he just points out that, look, he doesn't have the means to run for Congress for free. He needs to pay himself a salary, Brad. And you know what? I think that's beautiful. If he wants to take money from Democrats and pay himself, no harm, no foul, don't you think?
John, what are we doing this stupid radio show? We should be
running for Congress.
Right. We should be running for Congress and paying ourselves to run for Congress.
It's so good. So you should at least skim this piece. Now, if I was a Democrat in West St. Louis County, perish the thought, but there was a gentleman named John Kiehne who was originally in this race, who's taken some losses for the Democrats before. He's a prolific activist. He helps West County Democrats a lot. He was essentially, the way I view it, Brad, muscled out of this race because you have a big, heavyweight Bigfoot come in and be like, I'm going to be the candidate now. I'm the high-profile guy. So in 2026 and beyond, if I'm a Democrat and some high-profile guy that used to have a lot of money and used to be on TV comes in and tries to muscle me out, I'll probably point to that and be like, the last time we tried this, not only did we lose, but the guy took a bunch of donor money and paid himself. So do you want somebody who's actually been working for the Democratic Party for a long time? Or do you want a Bigfoot to come in and stomp around and get everybody out of the race and then pay themselves?
So you're calling Ray Hartmann the Bigfoot then, right?
Yeah, in that analogy. And remember, we talked about this multiple times. I'm biased toward Ray. Ray has always been good to me. That doesn't mean that you and I can't look at things like paying yourself $5,500 a month to run for Congress and laugh at that.
Well, I've always had a appreciation for Ray for the things he's done. He's a risk taker. Obviously he's been a big part of the community with his publications, with being on Channel 9. Is he still on Channel 9? Is he still doing Donnybrook?
He's not. No. He quit that He announced back in March that he was leaving to run for office.
Oh, okay. I got it. Okay. Last but not least,
the number one
headline from the Post-Dispatch today, Brad. A gentleman named Alan Ochkar, not to be confused with Allah Akbar, but Alan Ochkar, who's the executive editor of the Post-Dispatch. The headline reads, Post-Dispatch to outsource printing operations to Columbia, Missouri. And that seems kind of innocuous. Who cares, right? But Brad, you scroll down a little bit, you actually look at the story. One of the alternate headlines could have come from the third paragraph, which is the Post-Dispatch is cutting 72 employees at the Maryland Heights printing press, Brad. So maybe that's kind of burying the lead. I'm surprised the Post-Dispatch would write a biased headline like this. So the Post-Dispatch is sending all their papers to Columbia at a facility owned by Gannett, of all companies, the national media company. And then the paper editions will be shipped in the morning to St. Louis. Now, Brad, you've forgotten more about media than I'll ever know. If a newspaper has to start printing at nighttime, what do you think that might do to certain aspects of their news coverage?
John, it's funny you should mention that, because in the second segment, I will tell you the story of the beginnings of USA Today in St. Louis. And there's a very, very, very interesting parallel to this that you may find interesting, you may not. But I'll give you just a little hint on this, is the fact that I had an office when I first went into business with my traffic network. This is going back like in, I believe, 1985. We had an office that was right next to, guess what? The USA Today distribution office in St. Louis.
No way, really?
Yes, and I will tell you a very interesting story which segues perfectly into this, but we'll do that in the second segment coming up. Does that sound like a winner?
Yeah, that's fantastic. It cut to the chase real quick, Brad, in the last 15 seconds here. If you like reading sports coverage from the Post-Dispatch, any night games, you won't find them in the next station.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about, which is sort of interesting. Okay, we have to take a break.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?